Yeah, so today the thinking is, Mark, you haven't heard anything that Peter's not coming, right? Because this is his topic. He's the one who's been pushing on it. He better be here. Could you text him or something,
I
please?
I, I don't have a text now. Sorry, I've just stepped out of the car. I've been over at the university all day, so
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
yeah, no, 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 don't worry. And also just to repeat to all of you, if you're late to have to leave early, it's absolutely not a problem ever. But anyway, we're going to be talking a little bit about memory palaces, and hopefully we'll get a better word at some point. I have a presentation that's maybe 4 minutes long to kind of give us a bit of context, and then a series of questions. If the series of questions are useful, cool. If not, we will just go all over the place. And I think we should start in literally 1 or 2 minutes because and also, and I apologize. Oh, here's Peter.
Good morning.
Hey, Peter, I am so grateful to see you. I was so annoyed that maybe you couldn't make it today because we're talking about memory palaces, which is your big topic.
Yep, wouldn't miss it for anything.
Well, good. Very glad you're here. And I do have to apologize to everyone. I do have two AI generated images. They are relevant. So I hope that will not offend too much. It was kind of fun in 2023 when AI was actually edgy, and now it's just quite dull. Right. Okay. I don't know who's coming, but to not waste time, and also to make it clear, different people can have different ways of doing it, but at least when I present, if you want to interrupt, we're all friends here. Interrupt, okay? If I'm going to answer your question in the next slide, I will tell you. So it's just not a problem. Let me just move you guys out of the way. Any initial questions? Okay, and also when I say interrupt, I mean it because right now I can only see a still image of Peter, no one else. That was the random single that came up. Right, so as I posted a little bit in the preview for today, active memory palaces and XR, it's a bit of a provocative term. So memory palace is also called method of loci. Look at that, these ancient guys sitting outside here in their togas. So the method of loci, as I'm sure you know, is a strategy for memory enhancement using visualization of familiar spatial environments in order to enhance the recall of information. Now, the information you're seeing on the screen right here is a mess. That's part of the point. There's no speciality even to this text. It's a bit awful, right? So the origins of this, I think, is kind of important. And that is using location for orientation. And the word orientation, I'm sure all of you know the etymology, but it's still nice to reflect on. It is about placing the map the right way around. It's about how you place yourself in space. See, it moved. I hope you saw it moved. That's animation, right? So the word orientation comes from direction east, part of the horizon where the sun first appears, from the Latin, the rising sun, originally just meaning rising, which of course is why the Orient is to the east, and maps used to point to the east, now they're pointing north. But what I think is quite lovely about that is where the sun rises, and we are now looking at where the sun rises for our knowledge work. So of course, when we look at the method of Loci and XR, these ancient philosophers now have XR glasses on them, right? I thought that was pretty cool how the AI could do that. So active memory palaces, excuse me, can be to an extent considered to be spatial view specs. I think that's quite a nice way of looking at it. And that was the presentation. Now it's over to questions. There is just a framing for the questions and for our dialogue. And that's why I literally put a frame on this to remind myself. So when your work and information can be everywhere, how can we best control it? I think it's maybe the biggest interaction challenge ever. I mean, working on a small Macintosh 9-inch screen in the beginning certainly had its issues. I'm not in any way saying that, but when literally everything can be information, how we give control to the users is a big deal. And as part of that is what superpowers should we have? You know, we shouldn't just do what we can do in the physical world, we should have superpowers. So that comes down to this series of questions. I'll just skim through them and then we'll go through them. one of the questions is how it relates to other mappings and shapes of knowledge, the concept maps and all of that. Is there correlation? Is there connection? Maybe not. Then there is the relatively obvious, how does it augment how we find information, how we are thinking in such an environment, how we can express something in that environment, maybe even as a student to a teacher, and how we can learn. Then we come to looking at the spaces themselves. VR and AR, of course, different. Could you have an AR memory palace that is a physical location that is also available for VR, and how? How would these things work together? And similarly, if you have multiple palaces, one of them, Fabien was mentioning right before the call, could be sitting on a train. You're not even in an office room. But so suddenly you need to have a spherical environment where you don't hit the chair in front of you. Beautiful challenges. Then we get down to the specifics of the interaction, such as how can we change the entire palace or room to change to show a different project, and how should they appear? And what I think on the level of interaction is, should you do a hand menu, should you push or pull or speak, or how should your body make that happen? And then the massive one is connection and nesting. How can these environments be connected to other environments, maybe nested? And how can relevant volumes of information be available without being overwhelming? Huge issue. And then, of course, there's the access levels. Like, if I look at my hand, if I look at the cells, I don't understand hand. I have to zoom out for that. It's like the difference between physics and chemistry, right? We have that with our information too. Seeing less, semantic zooming, as it's been called, doesn't necessarily show less, but it shows the relevant level. How can we do that in the environment? And then, quite separately, there's consequences of framing. How can memory palaces encourage, discourage, and frame specific ways of looking and thinking? And how can it frame our perspectives? I think maybe that one we primarily wait until Dini can join us again. She's away at a conference today, because that's a really deep question that's not just about implementation. Any questions or comments before I jump into specifics of these? Is that a no? Since I can't see you, even if you have a no, can you just say no?
No.
No. Okay, thanks, Ken. No, because the connection here has been very good and then bad. I'm glad you're still here. Right. Okay.
I got the image of the map room from Indiana Jones. We were thinking about zooming out. They just suddenly popped the image of the map room into my head.
Oh.
So I could see having the related memory palaces, but having the map be the same in all of them, so that you could look at the little miniature 3D model of your memory palace to be able to jump around between different locations within it.
That's interesting and cool. And I'm wondering, hi, Rob, glad you're here. At this point, because, just watching these slides and talking over them might not be the most exciting thing in the world. Why don't you all talk a little bit about what you think a memory palace is and what it might be? Because I really feel that one of our community's job is to get as much of this imagination out of, being at the back of our heads, right?
One thing I could add is that my student at the time, David Fox, and I, in 1993, wrote the foundational paper on semantic zooming. It was at the SIGGRAPH 93 conference. It was called PAD. And then Ben Peterson and others picked up on that and started doing all kinds of cool things. But that's actually where the idea began. So I'm in favor of it.
It's kind of amazing, Ken. You both you kind of bookend both the pioneering history and the future of this. And yeah, I'm very grateful that you're here. Rob.
A memory palace is designed as a tool to aid memory. So it's not about creating a text. It's about taking the points in a text and placing them in various places. Mark Twain used to do it in a park. He would hang cards on trees as he walked around. And of course, Giordano Bruno wrote many books about memory palaces. How does that apply to creating text?
So, Rob, thank you. You're obviously completely correct, and I have no idea. And I think the term memory palace for us is actually a really bad term. But Peter brought it into our discussion a good couple of months ago, and I think it's very evocative. But I think we need a new term, and we need to go further. I used to work in advertising in the 90s, and Ken, I was not doing anything exciting like you're doing. But we did actually print out these huge mock-up of ads, and we put them in the conference room. So it helped us think with the work. It was not just to present to the client, but it was also to see, does that make sense? Does that make sense? So I think in a way we should drop the term, use it as an introduction for a meeting, and just think about having knowledge in a space that you kind of know where it is. So it does what you said, Rob. But you can also, let's say you're a student, and instead of doing a AI written paper, you have to do a spatial layout of your learning so that whoever's judging your work can literally see that you understand some connections. It's basically a magical space. Sorry about the nonsense old term.
I actually like Memory Palace, and I think it's a good way to organize.
Yeah, and that's absolutely part of the job it should do in this context. But it can probably, for some purposes, go a lot further also. If Jonathan, please hold your hand. Fabien was first, and then Jim. Do you want to press the yellow hand button, Jonathan? But Fabien, please go ahead.
Yeah, I actually don't like memory palaces. I think I don't like them per se. I don't find it interesting. So it's funny because I do VR and XR because of the spatiality of it. Like what I find super exciting is this little device, little headset I'm shaking, which weight like what 500 grams or so and costs you $100. Give me access to a physical or an intellectual space, at least much bigger than the device itself, and that is potentially persistent. So I don't need to actually memorize any. I need to memorize a little bit, for example, the map or where the things have been located, or at least hints on how to find them back again. But the memory palace, the technique is if you don't have either a headset or paper or the internet, that's when back in the day, at least historically, it was powerful. I think most of us were not, it's not that we're not able to memorize even like a mobile phone number, we just don't find it useful. So we forget such techniques like the memory palace or ways to hash a number or whatnot in order to memorize it, because the technology of today doesn't make it that useful anymore. That being said, I'm still here today because I find that the specialization of knowledge, concept, of information, etc., is extremely powerful because we spend, I don't know, thousands of years, if not longer, as animals walking in space to survive, avoiding hyenas or whatnot, and hiding stuff in trees like squirrels. So most of us are really, really good with specialization and using it. So piggybacking on our ability to memorize where things are in space, to use it for concepts rather than actual location of physical object, I think is extremely useful or powerful. That's my intuition, at least. So I don't care for memory palace, the actual historical definition and the use of it. But I'm still here because I think if we find ways to put things in space and like compress the information, for example, with a map, and we can share it with each other over time, I think is extremely powerful. So yeah, that's why I'm here today. It's not for the memory palace old school kind of definition, but putting things in place and that are, no matter how abstract, like I don't know, like a mathematical function or whatever, and how to get there, build on top of it, write text, whatever it might be. Then I think there is a lot of potential there that has been played with a little bit, but not be really taken seriously.
Yeah, obviously, Fabien, I agree with you all the time. So how can I disagree now? But we're not just trying to do it here. We're trying to find a better environment and tech. Jim, please.
I would like to agree with Fabien in that I think it's an old term which was very useful at the time as a way to remembering keywords. It is expanding now as a way to understand whole subjects. So for me, the updated character that I'm after is a multi-room knowledge space. That's not a good title or a replacement, but that's kind of what I'm after. And I think a lot of us are after in terms of being able to understand more complex subjects or problems or elements of knowledge per se. So while I respect the term memory palace, I think it's just too old-fashioned to be useful to us.
Yeah, I agree, Jim. I have a reply to that, but Jonathan is next.
Yeah, I'm trying to not to repeat what's already been said, but I was quite struck. I didn't know it had such a specific definition of the most specific one we've been given it, and I think logically it's worth saying that the specific definition is a map in programming, as in you know where to look, and there you find the thing. So you physically know where to look, and sort of near, obviously a near example of that would be something in alphabetical order, or physically a library or something where you know the subject and the first letter and so on, and you know where to look. But I suspect we're going to be discussing things which also fall outside that definition. But I think it is worth making a clear distinction between the strict version and the non-strict version, because once you get away from the strict definition, then you're in a space and you have to search if you need to find something. So it is worth making that distinction, and I think it's worth also pointing out something I just thought an obvious thing, but a geographical map is not itself necessarily a memory palace, because only if you're familiar with the geography if you tell me a name of the town or something, then maybe I know where to find it. But if I'm not familiar with it, then it's a non-specific kind of memory palace. It's that you have to hunt around to find it.
That's really clever, Jonathan.
But it can act as a memory palace. If you obviously if you're showing your local area on your phone app or something like that, then it can act as a memory palace, because you can put your whatever favorite restaurants or something on there, and then you know where to look, and then you remember the place, but you know where to look, and you find the additional information you're looking for. So that's obviously a strict version, like map. Maps in programming where you have a key and a value, as they call it. Key is where you look, value is what you find.
That's interesting, because of course a map is a memory palace. When you look at a map and you look at a restaurant, if you had dinner there with a friend, you'll remember that.
If it's a familiar map, then it's a strict memory palace. That's all I'm saying. But if it's not familiar, then it's a map you're hunting around for whatever you're trying to find, and you don't know where to start.
Yeah, exactly. Just quickly on the name, you can see the screen, right? Yeah. So we talked about active memory palaces, and we're really talking about memory places, of course, in a sense also. So maybe we can then move to memory spaces. And instead of memory, maybe what we really need to be looking at active information spaces, because the notion of a memory palace is kind of a kicking off point. It's not, we don't want to recreate that fully, do we? Kartik, I see you have your hand up.
I haven't thought about this term very much before today. Just listening to everyone else. So Fabien said, we don't need to memorize anymore. And so that reminds me of Plato's old statement about writing, about how it will cause forgetfulness in everyone. And so I think the human race has been on this journey of increasing tolerance for forgetfulness for a long time. And maybe all this XR nonsense is just part of that. It's part of that, it's continuing that trend. But another way to think about it is maybe memory palaces earlier were ways to organize long-term memory, because we didn't have prosthetics for long-term memory. Now we have prosthetics for long-term memory. And memory palaces are still important, because when I want to work with something in a short term, I need to import it into my brain really quickly. It needs to become part of the context that I'm focusing on. And the idea of memory palaces seems to say something more about people than about knowledge or information. We were doing school the other day, and my wife asked my son, how do you remember the words to this poem, this silly poem that you can keep singing it, but you don't remember what we discussed in school? And my immediate reaction was this. It's a poem. Like, the form of a poem was designed to be mimetic, to sort of fit into your brain really quickly. And I remember that even in my school, that I could remember poems much faster than anything else. And memory palaces seem to be another mechanism like that, where you create a mapping between a real place and an imaginary place, and the real place somehow is easier to remember or easier to import. In my software, I've done these things with blank 2D spaces, where what I showed last week, you have this live programming environment where you can put these boxes anywhere. And I wanted initially, when I built it, I wanted to just have the flexibility to put any arbitrary two functions smooshed together, because these are the two things I'm working on right now. I want them next to me. That was my initial motivation. And my idea was that I would create lots of different views, and each one would be task specific and so on. But where I ended up was, once I put boxes relative to each other, I never created another view. I grew to depend on them having that orientation compared to each other. And that was useful to a certain scale, but it doesn't scale beyond that, because there's no background behind those boxes. There's nothing to anchor me. I only have orientation and distance. I don't have landmarks. And maybe I'm slowly groping my way towards memory palaces.
Interesting perspective. Thank you very much. Ken.
So where this intersects with what I've been focusing on is, I've always loved the phrase memory palace, not for its literal meaning, but for its implication that we as human beings can make use of our genetic heritage of these brains of ours evolved to interact with information here, not here. And I've noticed for many years that when a student walks into my office and they want to discuss something without even thinking about it, I go and I reach for a book, maybe one I haven't actually looked at in decades, but I know where the book is. And I say, here, this is what you need to look at. And how does that happen? That happens because my brain has evolved to understand that information is in the 3D world around us. And so in our work in our lab, I'm always telling my students that, we're wearing these things all the time, but we're really trying to go toward eventually we'll have these things. And that's the way we should be thinking about it. And we're thinking, okay, the goal is not to have a workspace, because I think that's a very narcissistic thing that kind of Meta and Google and Microsoft are pushing. I think the goal is to have a workshop. So you and I are having our meetings, our conversations in a way that, when people work on movies and productions and theater, that they put paper all over the world. They use miniature models. They have stuff stuck up on boards. They scribble stuff. People who are trying to get real work done are using the space around them because they just don't have time to deal with this. This is very nerdy, this rectangle. So what I tell them is, I've got this room in my house, and whenever I walk into this room and I put on my headset, there's information that is supposed to be in certain places, and I know where to find it. And we're writing our software to do that. And if I have a student who's sitting in Beijing and I'm having a conversation with them, our goal is that they walk into their room, but we're in the same workshop. And the idea is that we are using our human inheritance of spatial memory to make us better than we would be if we were just stuck with overlapping rectangles. Okay, that's what I'm saying up till now.
Lovely. Thank you. Jonathan.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you were, okay. Over to Peter then.
Okay, there are two ways to think about the memory palace. One is the literal, traditional mnemonic device, where going into an envisioned space in my head helps me to remember things that were connected to that space. It's sort of like the problem of you're in one context, say you're in a library, and you're thinking about library kinds of things, and then someone asks you a question that is related to something that has nothing to do with academics. And your mind takes a few minutes before you can switch tracks from being in the academic context of I'm thinking about my current research to now I'm in the programming lab context and I'm thinking about what package would be the most appropriate to use to solve this particular problem. So when I go into the space, it helps me to, I guess, if we imagine that we're all large language models, we're in a higher dimensional space, and we have clusters of related things, it helps us navigate to the correct cluster in that higher dimensional space in order to be able to more readily find the thing that we're looking for. But then if we're in a context of a technological setting inside a headset where I don't actually need to be able to remember it anymore, it switches into being a finding aid, and almost as if the location in that space becomes a search query that will surface items that I wouldn't have otherwise. So then I just imagine I have one space in my memory palace that is going to correspond to a place where I drop all of the data objects that are related to some given topic. And I might have forgotten that a data object was related to this topic. So I don't remember that I'm trying to find a specific piece of information. So I'm no longer in information seeking of a known item. It's more of a, I want to go back and see everything that I collected over time that was related to this subject, and I would have dropped them all in this location in the memory palace. So sort of like a fuzzy tagging. I don't need to remember what the tag name is. All I remember is that if it was related to this kind of a problem I was thinking about, I would have dropped a copy of it here. Oh, that's another great thing. Inside of the headset, we can automatically spawn as many copies of an object as I want. In my real library, I've actually wound up purchasing multiple copies of a couple books so that I could have each copy in the section of my library where it most logically belongs, where that particular book was equally relevant to two completely unrelated sections of the library. So I have my programming languages section of my library where a copy of the book might be there. Then I have some subject matter related pieces of the library in another room. So I actually wound up with two physical copies so that the book was in both rooms and I wouldn't have to try to figure out the other context. So in the virtual world, we can do that. We can spawn objects and leave them in the spaces in our memory palace that are related to the topic areas that we're doing. And I'm highly interdisciplinary in my research. So I have my hypertext research, I have my World's Fair research, I have my urban planning future cities research, and they're relatively disconnected from one another, but there are some items that transect all of those areas. So being able to spawn data objects and drop them with that kind of organization is useful. And it's a sort of a coarser, fuzzier grain than tags, because I don't necessarily know how to verbalize a proper tag to go for it, but I know to spawn a copy of it in this area. So when I am looking for it, I'll be able to find it.
Thank you, Peter. That makes a lot of sense. Ashkant, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, love the analogy there with context switching. Really relate to that. And I was actually also thinking about tags. I have mentioned that as one of the points I want to talk about because initially I found myself putting things based on an hierarchy, and then later on I kind of started adopting tags, and it was like, yeah, it was very freeing and very flexible. Especially in the context of like sorting notes or putting bookmarks. Actually, I think I found a tags based system very helpful, and yeah, that's how I can relate to what Peter was just talking about. And also love the difference between workshop and workspace. Really like that analogy there as well, with all the talk from Meta and everyone about office spaces and workspaces. But then we don't, like, the imagination in the videos is always about getting work done, but only in these 2D screens, but not necessarily anyway using the spatial aspect of it all that much. Especially I'm thinking about the the first time they introduced this Infinity Office kind of video from Meta, or then it was still Facebook or Oculus, I think. But yeah, like I was actually hoping more from these videos about like what kind of workshops or even like places of work we would see in the future. And it was more of just floating screens, and I was disappointed. So yeah, love that. A few other top points I wanted to talk about. I think for me, Memory Palaces prominently is from the TV series Sherlock, BBC adaptation. They kind of feature it in a couple of different seasons, and that was my first introduction to this. Yeah, I really liked how how they're trying to bring it to the more common knowledge kind of thing, because I think initially it felt a bit esoteric, and then later on I got to recognize such patterns in my daily life as well, right? So like initially you might think that it's you know something very esoteric, but once you know it, you start finding that pattern everywhere in your life. For example, I write small little notes at the bottom edge of my notebook, which are not related to. So let's say I have a book for work, a notebook for work, and if let's say I want some personal reminders, I sometimes scribble them exactly at the bottom edge of my notebook. So like there's some special aspect to it. May not be 3D, but again, like just that note being there, I know where to look, and that has some information that is not related to the context I'm working in currently. So yeah, maybe the other one was about word clouds. So maybe presenting tags, or even like more frequently used tags for some topic bigger than some other tags in word clouds. That also has some meaning to it, maybe even some spatial meaning. So maybe in this context, that was something I got reminded of. Also, one other parallel I wanted to think about was so you kind of have to visit your mind palace quite frequently. I see some question about lab notebook is filled by time. Yeah, that too, right? So like you're going back in time also as you flip through the notebook. That's another notion of maybe spatial, but also time being a dimension, right? So yeah, I love that. But sorry, yeah, I kind of got sidetracked. Yeah, so regularly visiting your mind palace, that's also something because so I think you kind of have to know the place very well to be able to attach different pieces of information around it. So if let's say if I go to a featureless room and I don't imagine any other features in it, then it would be very difficult for me to, like orient information, right? Like the entire thing about orientation there. So something similar, I'm trying to draw parallels with spaced repetition, right? So for example, if you want to remember something, there's a like you remember it or recollect it one day later, and then 1 week later, then like 1 month later, and then it kind of goes into a long-term memory. So something similar with mind palaces as well. I feel like you have to be very like that place has to be quite well known to you to actually be useful. Otherwise, if you try to create a mind palace once and you kind of never stick to that system, then I don't think it would be of much use to you. Yeah, and maybe one last point then, actually two last points. One of them is about navigating, visiting different websites. So already I think at some point we kind of switched terms. I'm forgetting the reference here, but when internet with just like at the cusp of internet being a must thing, we kind of switched to terms like visiting or navigating to a website, going to a website. So these are all spatial terms, and I forget exactly what was the reference and how it was called before, but I thought that was an interesting aspect as well, with hyperlinks and how we kind of use spatial terms for referring to all of these. And then a final mentioned would be about inner monologues. So this was a discussion that came up during my college time, that we found out some people don't have inner monologues. I'm one of the people who is pretty frequently talking to myself, right? Like as an inner monologue, and it kind of blew my mind that there are people who don't necessarily talk to themselves all the time and have this visual representation that comes to their mind directly instead of words. So again, an interesting topic where like you're not talking to yourself. So maybe something similar about spatial memory palaces as well. Maybe spatial is more native to some people than to some other people. So maybe that might also influence how you use memory palaces.
There was a lot there. Thank you. One of the things that really stuck out and relates to what I'm going to say next is you used the term mind palace in addition to memory palace. I think that's very, very nice, because we're not just trying to make a thing in XR. And design-wise, one of the huge problems we have is we can do almost anything. So some of us may have an idea that a certain environment is focused on this, and someone else a slightly different idea, and that makes it really, really difficult to co-design because we have goals that we may not agree with. And in a sense, I just copied and pasted and wrote a little thing here. Being in a room full of knowledge and how to organize it seems to be what we're dealing with, whether it's to find stuff. And Fabien, you mentioned your diary, your wiki. That should definitely be a room. You shouldn't just have a timeline for that, right? You should have your own special room where you've set up criteria for how you're continuously filling up journal, even if you don't place things in specific places, should go. So as I think most of you know, my philosophy started out as the notion of liquid information. I was quite young and my father said, wouldn't you want your information to be solid? Which was a great point. So we're obviously trying to balance those two. When it comes to the memory aspect, things shouldn't move about willy-nilly. But when you're trying to think, you should have the freedom to that, right? So I just pasted in a chat here a few of the interactions that I hope we'll get to talk to at some point, which is, you know, how do you shape the space? How do you make something small? How do you make it big? How do you hide? How do you reveal? All of these exciting things that are quite visceral can start coming into play. So yeah, that's quite fun. But anyway, yeah, so many different aspects of this. But I guess the one thing we are all looking at, and this is a question, not rhetorical, we're talking about putting on a headset and having stuff that is relevant to your wider life or a specific project available for you to organize and to find, right? I'm sure I said something slightly wrong there, and I would love it if anybody's being pernickety, because that's the right kind of questioning right now. Also, in a few minutes, Fabien will do a little update, by the way, of what we've actually been implementing that relates to this work. Okay, I'm not going to go through the questions on the slides because we've really gone in very, so I'm looking at Peter's here. So the thing is, okay, I'm going to ask every single one of you this very simple question. When you put on your headset, and the assumption is that in this future, all your knowledge is available. So forget data, metadata, forget all those issues. As a fantasy, you put on your headset and all the knowledge that you work with. Oh, Fabien is, excuse me, Brandel's joining. So, hi, Brandel. You missed the boring bit. No, I'm just kidding. So we're at the point in the discussion now where we're kind of discarding the term memory palace, and we are going back to basics. We're saying, when you're finding and orienting yourself, things should be as you expect. But there are so many different aspects of this. So I'm going to ask everybody. Actually, Mark, before I ask, why don't you make your comment or question first?
Sure. It was just a quick one to pick up on the thing that it slipped in the end of what you were saying earlier about the sense of sharing, having information and sharing it. Because I think that's the difficult thing to square, is that we repeatedly talk about having very rich pictures, which often have their meaning because we understand them in a special way, which normally means a way that we can't easily transmit to somebody else. I thought it was very interesting, Ken's point earlier about, you having essentially your meeting room, but with your own information to hand. I think that's quite an interesting idea. So for instance, if I'm in a meeting with somebody else, do I necessarily need to see all the richness of their memory space or whatever we're calling it? Because I probably wouldn't necessarily gain much from it. And indeed, it might just be more sort of noise in the space. But obviously for them, much more relevant because that's adding to their recall and essentially giving them more easily addressable things.
Multi-room, as you're mentioning there, and as Ken is talking about a lot and working on a lot, is absolutely an interesting further complication. But I'm going to ask the question now for every single one of you, and I'll put it in text here as well. When you put on the headsets, and the assumption is all your knowledge is there, forget the current syncing and all of that nonsense. All your academic documents, all your notes, all your models, all your videos, all your pictures are accessible. And forget about a specific tool, specific task, specific job. What do you want your initial view to be? And what basic things do you want to be able to do, and maybe even how? I hope that's a good question. And who is first? Actually, Brandl, you came last. You're first. How's that? Oh, you're lucky, Brandl. Jonathan is ready.
Yeah, what you need to see is based on some prediction by the system, what you want to see is what you need next, or rather, since it won't know exactly what you need next, you need to see all the things you might need next, arranged by probability. Because if you think about it, if it knew what you wanted, then it would just show that one thing. And so obviously, insofar as the mind of the system is able to track your mind, it can show you more certainly or fewer things that you might need next. Thing being anything, information or an app or something like that. But of course, the trade-off is because it can't totally track your mind, although I think it could get pretty good. The trade-off is, as always, between what you need. Between its guess about what you need next and some kind of stability in you seeing some kind of familiar layout. Because otherwise, it's like anything. It's like if you do a search, that a web search or any kind of search, you've got a list of 20 items or something, one of which might be what you want, but you have to scan through the list because the list is not in a useful order other than maybe you can put the most probable one at the top. So the trade-off, whatever the display is, the trade-off is, I think, going to be between showing the things you're most likely to want most prominently and also having a stable layout. So there might be a way of doing that by showing things in whatever they are in a familiar places on the screen, but enlarged or something if it thinks they're more prominent. So here I'm thinking about having the entire semantic space of anything that you might want to see in principle on the screen somewhere, but most of it is tiny or hidden or collapsed or something like that. So you're only seeing the stuff you want. But anyway, my major point there is it's probability based on your next action or your next desire.
A very surprising answer. I didn't think the system would do anything for you at all. So thank you for that, Jonathan.
Oh, okay, this is my system.
No, great.
Theoretical system.
That's the whole point. Having completely different perspectives is the whole point of this. Peter, please.
Okay. In addition to what I've been working on most recently, what the system could infer based upon my to-do list, I'm going to be looking at next. I also want to be able to get knocked out of the local optimum. So I'd like to have it randomly show me a few things that Mark Anderson, Frode, and Ken have been looking at that they just recently saved or flagged, assuming that they flagged them as being publicly available for other people to be notified of their existence of, because I'm sure they're looking at different RSS feeds than I do. and some items based upon the overlap of our interest would definitely be of value to me if they were ever surfaced, but they wouldn't surface in the feeds that I'm immediately following. So just a certain percentage of items randomly from time to time popping up from other people's feeds, the people who I've been working with or networking with. And then maybe could even reach out one hop over their networks. So maybe some even smaller percentage could be a few random items from the public feeds of people who are following Mark Anderson or Ken. And that would help me to get a statistical possibility of surfacing items that I never would have searched for. Because the tyranny of the search is that the systems are more carefully mirroring what we've been searching for, what they think we're looking for, and they keep serving us up more of the same. And that's great until there's something that would be of value to you that doesn't correspond to what you've been searching for. So the search model is getting over specialized on what it thinks I need to be looking at. And I need to get jogged out of that local optimum so that I can find some things that wouldn't surface for me otherwise.
So that's completely meaningful and useful, Peter, and everyone who's gone before, also in writing. And I'm very grateful Brandel is the person who's coming up now, because my question is to focus the question. So far, most of this can be done on a nice big computer monitor, because it's about what the system guesses for you. How can we use the space? When we put the headset on, how do we want to use the space? And there's been so many brilliant comments about, there's a huge difference between what it should show if I'm at work or I'm at home, for instance. So Brandel, over to you.
So some of you will remember what I built with Word Reality back in 2017. There's a YouTube video of it. One of the things that it had, it was a virtual reality word processor for HTC Vive and WebVR, RIP. Because WebXR was the successor, not because anybody's done anything nefarious to virtual reality on the web. But one of the things that it did was create. So the goal was for the input to be primarily oral. So you would speak things, and they would come up. They would come up as documents, but then out of view, in world but out of view, there would be a region of space that was devoted to doing a word search on the last few words that you entered as a set of images. And I think that was really interesting in terms of being able to conjure up things implicitly in a way that meant that hopefully they would be minimally distracting. Having those things up on screen is something that I had done prior as a sort of a 2D kind of system, but having that integration of being able to have it something where you can be proprioceptively aware of what it is, but also have it out of view, I think is really interesting. I also was talking to somebody at the Near Future Lab last week, and I recommended them to see your Chalk Talk, Ken. And I think that those kinds of constructions and conjurings are really interesting. And I likened it to, I'm not sure if you're familiar or if other folks are familiar with some of Takeo Igarashi's work on sketching for search, being able to draw poses and use that as a mechanism for, I think it's actually anime search. But those are some of the ways of going from verbal oral to gestural, and to be able to create a composite sort of view of both the encoding of gesture and the implicit search, if you want to mean it like that. And so I think that by leveraging the space and by leveraging what are some of the modalities that are a little bit more natural for us, we have the ability to kind of have that as a function on tap, providing we're willing to waste the bandwidth and whatever, but so far so good. But in a way that doesn't break the flow of actually focusing here if that's actually what we want. So hopefully that makes some amount of sense.
Absolutely, it makes a lot of sense. Kartik, is your hand still kind of floating about?
Yeah. So when you rephrased it, I realized I didn't have much to contribute. My sort of degenerate answer was, it is like a screen. I want to think about it as the VR headset. It disappears. The act of wearing a headset disappears in the fullness of time. You're just always in your memory palace. So that initial condition doesn't exist ever. The only reason why I care about that initial condition is every once in a while, I need to clear my context. So my note-taking app, which is on a screen, on a 2D screen, it has a second view. So I can press a keyboard shortcut on my desktop and it pops up a blank window on my screen. And the only purpose of that is to avoid distracting me when I need to capture something. I have something in my head right now. I just need to capture it. It's often kind of complex and I need to put it down. And I often have this problem where I go to my email to do something and whatever's on the inbox when I open my email completely blows my context. And so I find the second little like view for the same data set to be incredibly useful, which is just blank. So I think that's the only initial condition I can think of.
I think that's phenomenally useful. This discussion is going all over the place. Fabien is talking about clearing context by going from room to room, the doorway effect. We wonder why we went to the kitchen and those sorts of things. Brandel has been doing a lot of neuroscience studying, and he's educated us a lot in the past. Now, there's so many things in the little squidgy bits in our brains that are evolved from the world around us. Where do we want to violate those things? Where do we want to utilize those things? I want you to keep talking, please. I just wanted to mention that conceptually, at least, for what we're trying to do for our main project, we are considering reverting to the notion of icons and documents simply as a way for everybody to understand the basics. You know, sometimes you want to open a full document, it can be all kinds of crazy stuff. But very often in XR, I think we share the notion that you want to be able to have a ton of tiny things that are meaningful to you. And you need the means to make them big, make them small, and to get them into configurations. So, you know, now we've introduced so many concepts around that. It's really, really fascinating. So, Kartik, when you talk about no initial condition, yes, I like the idea of in your memory palace, because it's always there conceptually in the future. You literally have a living room or something. You go and there's nothing there. Right? It's almost like taking off your headset, but you're not taking it off. And there you have some of your core things. Right. So here's the question then. If we forget the reality of data and metadata, what Peter was talking about is, you know, I have this thing here. How does that relate to the other thing? So the spatial shaping of things could be very, very interesting. Peter, you are saying something about fully skeuomorphic. Yeah, we absolutely want full skeuomorphism 100% part of the time. What does that mean? Do you have any thoughts on that? And then we have a few more of you to say stuff, and then Fabien.
Yeah, so I'll say a little bit. I've been typing a lot because I've been having other things going on, and I can type more clearly than I can talk. So that's my textual basis for. I wander when I talk. When I got to type, it's got to be concrete. It's characters reflecting back at me. So that's some of the authoring things that I was talking about earlier. About, you know, you're doing a wiki, you're authoring it for yourself, for your future self, so you can remember what the heck is going on, putting it in piles or rooms or windows or folders or whatnot. Or are you trying to do this, say, I want to explain this to both my future self and other people because they would find it interesting, or they give me some good feedback, or I start to build a community around whatever it is I'm doing, and I get good stuff out of that. I mean, it's not just me and the knowledge. It's me, the knowledge, and everyone else I want to be encouraging to explore or to be, you know, come along with me in my treehouse. But I think that you do end up with a lot of people doing the skeuomorphic. Oh, let's make it look exactly like a real, you know, sword. The video game world. You know, I got swords and things, and I'm pretending to be, you know, a wizard or whatnot. But I think if you get too abstract, it can be good for certain people, but a lot of people just won't fall into that at all. I mean, I think we have a good deal with search coming up, where I can talk to the system and it will come back with you know, something reasonable. But what would the search results come back in this memory palace? It wouldn't be like I'd have to walk over to the Dewey Decimal Card Catalog and go through it or anything like that. I get a new pile or a new room formed or something like that and walk into it and throw it away. So anyways, that's all I have to say on that. I put most of my stuff in text here. But the authoring for others versus authoring for your future self, I think, is an interesting tidbit that needs to be kind of thought about.
Thank you, Peter. And obviously, the future of text, we like writing. The way that I do these reports afterwards, I put the chat log and the transcripts into Claude. So it does take into account what you write as much as what you speak. So that's totally good. Ashkant, and then Rob, I think we need you. You haven't spoken on this yet. I just wanted to say, Bob Horn, every once in a while, he'll pop into our meetings when he can, and he'll keep saying, and I'm so grateful for it, where are the lists, to paraphrase. You know, right now we're working on interactions, tasks, data, all of that. It's such a very basic example of where having all of those things in a space connected to each other. So when I send Fabien another document where we argue over a feature, well, this is the task it's supposed to do. You know, so sometimes literally a massive monitor that has a little bit of depth to it can be very, very useful as well. We shouldn't always necessarily need things to be voluminous. Yeah, Ashkant and Rob, and then Fabien, I think, unless someone else has something before he shows.
I wanted to focus a bit on the starting starting with a new space kind of question that you put forward, Frode. Because like one of the classic things in painting, for example, or like when you're faced with something blank, so you kind of have this like where do I start from, or what do I do next? And then even with painting, like you don't want to make that first stroke or that first paint blob, right? So you might do something wrong. So something on that sort. So maybe the system need not like instead of starting from a blank state, maybe it's already in some sort of an organized state, and maybe the organization can change depending on how you want to go forward. But maybe having something to look at, maybe that could be initially just clustering based on like whatever notion, right? So maybe cluster different thoughts together, different information together, and then show me one of those clusters. And then maybe if that's not the cluster that I'm thinking about, then that will just by looking at it, I would think, no, this is not what I need right now. I need something else, and that something else would be what I actually need and would be fetched next. So maybe having that initial prompt instead of a blank state would be nice. And also maybe relating it to how we have recall versus recognition. And I think there's a difference, right, in our psychology or memory processes. So actually taking the effort to recall something is a bit more difficult, I think, than recognizing something. So visually, or just when something is put in front of you, maybe recognizing it is a bit easier, if I remember correctly, than trying to recall something that there's no prompt in front of you at all. So maybe having something in front of you to recognize and maybe just dismiss is better than having to recall something exactly from a blank state.
That's really interesting, to have aspects of the environment to prompt you to hold on to, which isn't necessarily literal documents or notes or something, just anything. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Ken, please.
Okay, I'm going to say some things that might be controversial, but what the heck, right? So in 1900, most reasonable people might have argued that our growing industrial needs called for breeding faster horses. Within a decade, people realized faster horses was not the answer. Instead, we had cars and paved roads. Cars are useless without paved roads. So that fundamental change of infrastructure changed everything. And of course, cities grew and we got industry and all this kind of stuff. And I think after the XR singularity, I call it the XR singularity when everybody's going to just be wearing the glasses and everyone will forget about them. And then it'll just be normal reality. Screens will be like horses, the way we think of screens now. This is an obvious point. The space around us is vastly larger than screens. Not just larger, but vastly larger. It's no comparison. And so in addition, we will have the advantage, which we do not have now, of having the ability to make decisions about our intention implicitly using very low cognitive load, the way we do now when we navigate the physical world. Think about what happens when you're cooking in the kitchen and the water's boiling and this is running and that's happening, this thing. And it's easy for you to context switch continuously because you're dealing with your own superpower of physical space. And all of this will be joined with AI that is trained both on the entire world's knowledge, as LLMs now are, and on my preferences. And there'll be new methods of training that understand my physical body preferences. We haven't developed that yet, but after the exosingularity, billions of dollars will be spent on developing those training methods. And so we have superpowers as humans. We have language, we have spatial memory, we have shared spatial memory with other people, and all of this cultural and cognitive and psychological understanding of what that means. And we have deictics, this, that, those, all these shortcuts which tie those together. So to me, it's going to be a fundamentally much, much richer world. And I'm trying to figure out how we prototype that now, even though we're still using horses.
Yes. No controversy detected. Peter, and then over to Fabien to update us a bit.
Okay, one other interesting thing that we can do in VR is to bind an abstract piece of data to a concrete representation that will be easy to remember and locate in the 3D space. So say I have a scrimshaw pipe, and I could attach to that scrimshaw pipe the bibliographic data file that Mark Anderson developed from combing through and hand validating all of the records from the ACM Hypertext conference. So I could bind that data set to the object, and then I could stick the object somewhere in my virtual replica of 221B Baker Street so that I could find it easily. So that's the sort of thing we can play with in the 3D space that you couldn't have otherwise.
Yeah. Ken, do you have an additional thing? Okay, okay. Fabien, you want to show us what's happening in reality, in virtual reality?
Yes, yes. A quick comeback also on the kitchen aspect, because it's an old paper that I read a long time ago, but that somehow before I was doing VR for sure, but that really that's how I learned about cognitive science way back when. And it was about how you organize your kitchen. And I thought that was actually very interesting because indeed it's a little bit like your desk also, but in your kitchen you have a lot of tools that you must use in sequence. Now we have like abstraction where everything is inside the screen and the keyboard, but in the kitchen it's a bit different. And it's very interesting because indeed you plan your kitchen as you plan your recipe, or you're not going to have the same kitchen setup based on whatever recipe you're doing. And what it does, it offloads a lot of the cognition you would have that makes it easy, because you put the pot there and you put the butter next to the pot and you prep where you have all the little bowls and everything. So once you have basically transformed the recipe to a spatial configuration, then it's easy. But if you start before this and you get a phone call from a friend or whatnot, it's much trickier, and I think mise en place, mise en scène also. But yes, it's that step where you use the space and the tool in that space as a representation of the process that got me really fascinated by cognitive science. And then when later on, years after, I was like, wow, I can play with space, not with a 3D printer that is so slow and bulky and expensive and whatnot, but and not with Lego, with a headset, with code. I was like, wow, not going to swear, but wow, the potential is huge, really fascinating. So I'm actually a bit on the move, so my connection is not great, so I will not do screen sharing. So it will be a kind of a little, you will have to click on links. So I put little recordings also because live demos can be a bit messy. So I invite you to click on the link in the chat. And from there, you should have 3 videos on top, last week videos. The very first one is funny. It not really work per se. It's the one called Stimlink to work on WebXR. So I invite you also to.
Should we play that while you speak over it, or how do you want
Yes,
to
yes, please
okay,
do.
tell us when to click.
You can click now. Just make sure the video is on mute because I recorded it with the music, and it's going to be a mess if you all play the music. Also, what's funny is because I'm traveling, I try to keep it tight, so I don't have a computer. So I bought a Steam Deck, which is the Linux gaming machine. So that's why I have the little thumb up like this. And the screen is minuscule, like, I don't know, 9 inches or something. So programming on this is a huge mess. But what Steam does is with Steam Link, you can do screen sharing. So basically, I'm programming in the headset, but I'm screen sharing my computer as the Steam Deck on the headset. So I have the WebXR actual result and then the desktop of the Steam Link there. So it's not code per se, but it's an interesting setup because the Steam, I'm not going to take it because otherwise I'll get disconnected from this meeting. But having it and wirelessly connecting to the headset and being able to just work, because indeed sometimes you do need just a bigger screen, that worked out really well. So yeah, little trick there when you're traveling, if you still want to code in the headset and you don't have like a whole live coding setup, that worked out quite well. Now for something a tiny bit more serious, the second video is called Persisting Across Sessions. So I invite you to click on it and please press play. But basically from the name, you probably understood already. It means you have multiple sessions when you have a document, a manuscript on the left, or the document you're getting your reference from. You can save locally, so that's only in the headset. So it's using local storage from the browser API. So nobody but you get that information. There is nobody who is having access to it. And it also means if you're offline or if you want to just play with it, you're fine. If you refresh the page, normally you would lose that information. Now you can load from local storage and have it back. And in order to make my life easier for testing, I made remote storage, which is exactly the same thing, but it's stored on a web dev server. What makes it, I'll actually put also a link if you want to try live this, because that's a lot more fun. And what you will see is in the URL, you have 2 parameters. I recommend you don't try in the headset right now, but you can if you want. It's the username, so that's this specific demo, and then the remote storage URL, which is the annotated bibliography JSON file. And it's going to put 3 things back in place. Number 1, it's the commands. So for example, save to local storage, so you can put that anywhere else you want in space. What's in the manuscript, and other data related to usage. So it means also now I can do that test remotely, or I could share my workspace with others here. And you can switch from local storage to remote storage. So yeah, that was to make it persistent, so that this idea, why do I mention it there, is I think the beauty of Memory Palace or this kind of thing is when you put the headset, you remove it, you come back the next day, it's still quote unquote there. If every time you start anew, then you cannot build memory and everything we mentioned about recall. That's not going to work. Peter, your question, I saw, what kind of headset do you use? Here it's just a Quest 3. Honestly, you could use like a Quest 2 as long as you scale the font to do something to be extremely big. If you can, the Vision Pro, because for text, I'm not, especially Brendel is not here, so I can be honest. I wouldn't buy a Vision Pro. It's an amazing piece of device. For 99% of use cases, it's overkill. I don't think if you play video games, don't buy that. But in the one case where you need text to be readable and a lot of text, like when you're coding, then it's kind of worth it. So yeah, but yeah, if you just want to play around, I think a second-hand Quest 2 is enough. And I'll make, before I go further, yes, the last one. So it's called visible citations. So I invite you to also click on it. But you get a preview from the previous video. Now, when you pinch on a text snippet inside a document you would cite, it becomes yellow, but also you have a line, a red line, just to make it not that subtle, that goes from where you were in the document, so what you're citing, to the manuscript writing. The idea being that you want to visually see not just, oh, I cited the document, but that citation come from that specific place. And yeah, that's the three ill things from this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabien. It's so great when you interrupt in the best possible way our meandering discussion to say, here's a bit of reality. It gives us the credibility to do the meandering discussion. So I hadn't seen those particular pieces. I'm extremely grateful to see them today. Oh, Fabien, your hand is still up. Do you have another point?
I will jump in on this actually, because something I wanted to say when Peter mentioned the Sherlock video, so Sherlock Holmes, and he started to do the memory palace, and it's indeed as an inspiration. I absolutely get it. It also, it does get me excited, but I think it's kind of idealization of the technique, and it's dangerous because it's what nobody's having. Nobody's having that experience, and that's what makes Sherlock Holmes, for example, such a sexy quote-unquote example, is that it is such a rare case. So I think we need to be a little bit cautious with those pieces that are inspirational, because then it creates a lot of frustration for everybody, that we're not getting there. Like, oh, we're not suddenly becoming Sherlock Holmes. Like, you don't get also all the logical reasoning and all the deduction that this exceptional persona is having. So I think, yes, it's tricky to go from those inspiration piece and the discussion to like cold reality, like super minimalist gray background and whatnot, and it's shaky. And but I think I think it is important, and that's kind of I think the back and forth is interesting, to go from like what actually works today, what we still want maybe to go, but without being too like the sirens in the sea that get you trapped there and you can actually not leave because it's actually infeasible. Yeah.
I have comments, but I also have Jonathan Finn.
Hi, I've never actually seen Sherlock, Fabien, though I've seen some clips, so I sort of know.
Hello, you're a British person. I think it's by law. Anyway, keep going.
Well, I liked I like the 1990s early version of Sherlock, the much more authentic version. But anyway, but I sort of know what it's like, so I've seen a couple of clips. I think, Fabien, you said that nobody really has a memory palace. Well, I had an extraordinary experience the other day. A friend of mine, Alex, she's a woman who's a perfectly normal person, though she's very, very organized. She revealed that she actually has a very strong synesthesia, she calls it synesthesia, to do with dates and numbers. And so she, as I said, she's organized. She's a very, very high level, you could say PA. She was actually involved in organizing the 2012 Olympics. I think she was in charge of the organizing the funding of the 2012 Olympics. She's supremely organized, and she says she sees dates spatially, and she sees months, or if you tell her about an event, she will see it spatially organized. I can't remember if she said it was in a circle or something like that, the whole year as a circle. And this is a very strong sensation of hers. And literally, she will be putting things mentally into the circle, or with, I think it may have been around her like this. And she also said she had this for numbers. And so weirdly, if she thinks about a number, she has a number line going from minus infinity right down there, and it goes up to 12 vertically, and then it stops, and then it goes 13, and then 13 to infinity goes horizontally. How about that? And she's not making it up. She strongly feels this. So, and I think from my own personal experience, I think everybody does have slight spatial thoughts about certainly some concepts. And maybe if you force people to use concept maps or mind maps or some kind of memory palace, maybe people do slightly incline towards their own personal locations for whatever the thing is. I certainly feel this to some extent for letters of the alphabet and colors. I associate them, and maybe it pains me slightly if you have a letter in the wrong color. I don't know.
On the
It's a real psychological effect, and obviously some people have it strongly, but some people, I think a lot of people have it weakly.
yeah, I think we all have it to some degree. If you look at the listing for today on the website, I list and say in the first place, blah blah blah, asterisk. In the first place is actually related to the notion of memory palaces, because in the first place, in the second place, right? I have the calendar year as a clock. Up is winter, down is summer. Goes in a circle, and I have no idea why. So we have that. But Ashkant, I see your hand, but just briefly, it's so great how these go all over the place. And I'll beg you, as I always do, if you want to write a paragraph or a full article on your perspective, please do. It'll go in the book. Obviously, anybody here writes a piece, it will go in. It's not going to be a matter of whatever. But the basic thing of that we kind of discussed earlier, the listy bit, and by listy, I'm not saying 1, 2, 3 in a column necessarily, but I am saying that even the basic thing of putting on your headset and being able to snap your fingers and say, I'm now working on, for instance, in my case with Fabien, the Sloan Foundation technical thing, to be able to snap my fingers and all the relevant documentation we have should be there, right? It's not the biggest, wildest thing in the world. Thank you, Jim. But even to do that, and if we forget about the data, forget about the synchronization that Fabien seemed to have solved, which is amazing, the actual interactions for this is still unsolved in a very, very exciting way. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about, you have a selection of items, and maybe you do a pinch, as we have already, but if you do a second pinch and you pull apart, maybe you pull apart options for layout, almost like in a grid. And if you twist your hands, it'll choose what kind of parameters you have for your layouts, right? And like when you're driving a car, you have controls, spatial controls on the car. Maybe you do a twist top right, twist bottom left, or whatever it is, just because you have the muscle memory. You know what you've done and where you can do things. So I really think, Mark has said a few times, I don't care what it is, just give me things to play with. I think that's really, really important. And this is why we're taking Chris Gutteridge's notion and Fabien's insistence of documents as being first-class objects into the worldview we're looking at, where most of the time we're probably going to have icons, but icons that the user can change the appearance of, get metadata from, arrange, and all of that stuff. So not dead icons on a desktop that then can open up into a full document, because full document in most cases is still probably better to deal with on a traditional computer if you're just writing a thing, right? So if you guys can think more about, you have your stuff, but without just being vague, but the specific thing, okay, I have 20 items over there. First of all, how do I select them? You know, if I want to make them orange, because that means something to me, do I have a hand menu? Do I use a laser pointer for that? Do I have a twisty thing? These are the level of specificities I think we can have fun with. And I think we have to, because if we don't enumerate them now, the big companies will just decide what fits their design guidelines. And just like the WYSIWYG became the WYSIWYG, we'll be stuck. So please keep experimenting. Right, that was my usual rant. And Ashkant, please.
I really love that context because actually the focus of my research work was all related to 3D user interfaces, and yeah, my entire research was around having interfaces that go on the arm. Yeah, that's why like all of this talk about 3D user interfaces and gestural interfaces is right at the core of my heart. So yeah, no, thank you for highlighting that. And maybe some of the things again, like the usual things, right? Like gestural interfaces, again, like how broad or how expressive or how large should they be, and then how frequently you have to do them, and won't you get tired by them? I think that's the usual disclaimer that gestural interfaces usually come with. And maybe one of the interesting things that maybe came up initially around project Soli, SOLI, from I think Google ATAP, I think later on it became, and now more recently I think it's already part of the Meta SDK's macro gestures, right? So having this notion of very slight gestures to denote something, which might be, I think, a bit more feasible in the longer term for doing different operations and doing them quite frequently even without tiring yourself out. Maybe that's also something that would be worth exploring as mapping to different things, at least the most frequent ones, maybe similar to how QWERTY, I think, as you said, like there's some things that just came about because of how like the bigger companies adopted to do it, and then later on it just became very difficult to change. For example, the QWERTY keyboard layout, right? So something similar with gestures or macro gestures, and maybe now would be a good time to experiment, and then maybe the most frequent kind of actions in any given software could be, the simpler macro gestures that don't require much effort and can be done more frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, over to you in a second, but I just want to remind you guys that all of this is recorded, put on YouTube, transcribed, and then I run a prompt through Claude. The prompt is obviously imperfect. So if you want to discuss with me suggesting new sentences for the prompt, please do that. But the key thing is, first of all, please go through the older meetings. And if you find you've been misrepresented or you want to add something, there's nothing wrong with adding something afterwards. I just literally write it below. But here's the cool thing. Why don't we consider designing a memory palace for this room, Monday room? How would we do that? Right. So imagine we put on a headset, we walk into virtually the Future of Tech Monday room. Maybe we do something basic like we all are represented by avatars in a space. I don't know. And that doesn't change. What are the different attributes? How can we spur our memories and learn things by having, there's over 500 of these meetings recorded so far. Only the last 6 months have been properly transcribed and AI'd and all of that stuff. But we have conceptually we have something to work on. So over to you, Peter, and then closing comments.
Okay, I wonder if anyone's done any long-term baseline studies of memory. My hunch is that people's memory skills were much more refined. If you go back to, say, the 1950s and you look at videos of high school students, and then you compare those to videos of undergraduate students today, it seems like, especially since the app era came along, there's been almost a dumbing down of expectations. I think that's the biggest problem. We've lowered our expectations to the point that people assume they can just offload all the actual work of studying and learning, let the computer do it, and all I have to do is just sort of do a pump and dump for real short-term memory for exam day, and then I can flush it all out 2 days later. So we've really been enhancing short-term memory, but we don't have any kind of a long-term retention exam built into the curricula. So you're not ensuring that students are actually building on what they got in the previous semester. It's each semester is almost starting de novo as if they just arrived on campus for the first time. And if you had something like Anki with a spaced repetition model, but only sort of a spaced repetition in testing to occasionally probe them and force them to retain things for long term for their grade, as opposed to letting them just get away with the short-term pump and dump model. I think if there was more willingness to invest effort and higher levels of expectation, honestly, we'd do much better. I was watching a whole series of these videos, why I left teaching on YouTube and how frustrating it is and how the undergraduates come in and they aren't even at junior high school level compared to what junior high school students were doing 10 years ago. And then we look at our competitors overseas and it's like, my God, what's happening? What's wrong with our population? We're not inherently dumber than the rest of the world, but instead you have big tech saying we've got to bring in people on visas because obviously anyone who wasn't raised in an American public school is going to be superior as an employee to anything that you can get here in the US. And we really need to start to grapple with that a little bit more, have higher demands of our students, and make sure that our tech is being leverage. You have that whole notion from Doug's day that you train people on the technology, that you have the coevolution of the technology and the person using it, training and being willing to invest the time to master it, and building open-ended tools, not just an app to do one specific thing. There are just too many apps. People's apps bills. And if you figure everything moving to subscription models too, it's getting almost like television. Every single program that I would like to watch is on a separate streaming service. And if I'm going to be being billed on them all,
Peter,
the whole model turns into a nightmare.
You're literally preaching to the choir. And I think that the most powerful thing we can do is, sorry, Fabien was telling me something. And Fabien, you do that now, please, after me. Obviously, education is a tricky thing. And, you know, what Tim Cook has been trying to explain to the current administration is you can't move factories to America because America is not investing in those streams, as you were saying, Peter. It's a big deal. But what we have here in our tiny little community is an inspiration. I think that is what we need to be above all. And I think that at the end of this Sloan year, obviously, Fabien has implemented amazing work, but I think we need a movie. I think we need a movie where we show a whole lot of stuff, and then some of it we flash in the corner or whatever. This bit works, right? Because imagine some investment with this. The whole idea is for a student to see, holy moly, because students are not idiots. Students care about their work, but you, Peter, I'm so agreeing with you. The culture has to be there to support it. The culture in Norway when I grew up was, who the hell do you think you are? But what are you, teacher's pet? Right? Our son now goes to a Jesuit school, Edgar, whom most of you know, and he's being encouraged to learn. It is so important. But we, just by doing an Iron Man movie and doing Iron Man interactions, can really encourage people like, damn, I want to deal with my knowledge. Right. So
1 o'clock.
Fabien, you have less than a minute, Fabien. Oh, don't worry. Please do introduce next week, and yeah, then we're almost done.
Yes, we were done. It's funny because no more exam, no more memory, and all this is the book I'm reading at the moment on building a web browser. Amazing. The one thing that is valuable is the exercise at the end of each chapter. All the blah blah and the text is amazing, but it's when I actually do the thing that I get challenged with whatever I've learned that I actually benefit from it. All the tests, as long as you do the action to the knowledge you acquired, in my opinion, that's worth it. The rest, if you memorize, is pointless. And why do I bring that up is also because, it's about a browser. Most of you are not going to bother and probably should not build your own browser, even though it's fun. But what you might want is to challenge what the browser can do. And I think that's basically going to be the point of next week is your browser can do a lot, but probably not enough for your context. And what if you had extensions to the browser? What kind of extension would be relevant here for knowledge management in XOR and whether XOR or otherwise? So it's in the schedule. If you could come next week, that would be wonderful. If you can't come, that's not nice, but that's okay. We understand. We'll have a video recording like this time. And also, if you want to come the week after that or the month after this because you want to show something, please do suggest. We here, we're open-minded. Please do share, do come and share with us.
To add to what Fabien is saying, if you want to share a little or a lot, that's entirely up to you. If you want to just have a slot, we're like, I have 5 minutes. Can I just say this? Absolutely. Now, I just want to highlight the kind of things in between. This will be real brief, but it's because of what Peter said, so I blame you. So here's the thing. Here's a Norwegian newspaper online. I copied it. I go into author, and I do a paste process. So what it does is this prompt. It says, if this is not English, first translate it, then clean it up. And it does that, right? This is, I'm showing it because it is not the system thinking for you. It is you having the flow of thinking. And similarly, we have things like copy, not the straight text, but copy, let's say, the keywords from the text. So it does a prompt, which you can edit yourself in here. And now I have that, I paste it, these are the keywords that it found. So this is a little bit about AI. It's also about, we need to think about the spatial relationships, but we also need to think about the conceptual relationships. And we're finally now at an age where these can be leveraged, right? I think that's amazing. I mean, the paced process takes a few seconds, but yeah, it's a lot quicker than doing every step manual. So anything you guys have to talk about what to do in this space, we'll have more and more theme discussions, but also the presentations go into all kinds of places. I'm just very, very grateful you're here. Thank you for those links, Fabien. Any final questions or comments or?
Maybe if you could give a brief context about what's the bigger picture for your and Fabien's work in this, like the highlights that Fabien presented, for example. Maybe just a brief bigger picture of how it all ties together, maybe.
Yes, but unfortunately I have obligations, so it can't be more than a few minutes, but please go ahead.
Oh, no, I meant I think I'm missing some context because I have not been part of this group for a very long.
Oh, you're asking. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so a bit of context for me, and then on to Fabien. For my world, when I started looking into this whole business in the early 90s, this is when CD-ROMs were about to happen, and I found them to be, and I can't think of a better phrase, information ghettos. And then the whole Mac versus Windows thing, it wasn't Mac versus Windows, it was Microsoft Office versus the world. So all these opportunities of moving things around is a big deal. And that's why Fabien is so strong on the web for XR, not apps for XR, right? By the way, last week I came to a website and it says I need to have Flash installed. That's been a few decades. We don't want to go through that stuff. We don't want to lose this stuff. So what you're doing with the web is important. And I think that is what Fabien was highlighting. Is that right, Fabien, about the modifications? Yeah. So we look forward to seeing as many of you as you can next week. And I do accept you all have lives. So if you're not there or if you're later, either way, when we meet up in person, there will be coffees. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.